without any further ado, Steve, it's all yours.
Well, thank you, Gary. I appreciate the kind introduction. And you know, tonight's topic is about the landmark study. I've given this webinar before, but I think we have to repeat this every now and then just so the new people coming on board can understand how unique the products that we have and the evidence that we have that nobody else has that our products work. I sometimes call this a study that forever changed the way we think about supplementation. And you know, it's actually apropos because just this morning I got an email from a downline about some article that appeared on Google or Yahoo about how, you know, there were no studies that supported that vitamins actually improved your health, reduced the risk of heart attack. It was just expensive urine, you know, the same sort of thing we hear over and over again. So I think it's particularly apropos that we talk about the landmark study today. So what is the landmark study? Simply put, it's the very first study of its kind. It really is truly unique. It was the very first study that was designed to evaluate the benefits and the risks of multiple supplement use over a long period of time. And let's talk about why that's important. Because we should look at the limitations of the scientific studies prior to the landmark study. And that's really almost all of the scientific studies that are out there. And you know as well as I do that there's a tremendous controversy. One day you'll get a study that says, well, vitamin E is going to do this, and the next day you'll see a study that says, no, it doesn't. Sometimes you'll see studies that seem to suggest there are benefits from taking supplements. Other times you'll see studies that talk about the risks. So that's because all of these studies have some very significant limitations. And one of the most significant limitations is it's really difficult to ask the right questions. You know, one of the things, sort of a story that I share with new students when they first start working in the lab, which kind of illustrates the way scientists work. It's the story about, and I may have related it on one of these calls before, but it's the drunk on his hands and knees under the lamppost, and the policeman comes up and he says, "What are you looking for?" And the drunk says, "I'm looking for my house keys." So the policeman, being an obliging sort, gets down there and he looks around and he says, "You know, I don't see your keys here anywhere. Are you sure you lost them here?" To which the drunk replies, "No, I lost them over there, but the light's better here." And that really, you know, illustrates the way we work in science. We often can't ask the questions we'd really like to ask because, you know, we can't shine the light on it. We have to go to where we can illuminate the question, and that limits the questions that we can ask. So one of the questions that everybody would really like to know was if holistic approaches are beneficial. And yet, so almost all the studies out there have been done, and again, this is sort of considered to be the scientific method, the gold standard, if you will, of clinical studies, is you only change one variable at a time. That's one of the benchmarks, gold standards, as I said. So, you know, if you're looking at a holistic approach where you've got a number of different things, that kind of flies in the face of what we consider to be the gold standard of how we do experiments. But for that very reason, our 21st century science is very ill-equipped to evaluate holistic approaches. So if we look at that, for example, so you can ask, why have so many studies not been able to show clear benefits of individual supplements? And we think about that. Vitamins are not drugs. You know, you have a drug that's created to treat a specific disease, and usually it's affecting a specific enzyme that's related to that specific disease. Well, that's that's what we might think of as a magic bullet. Although we realize that drugs are are not magic bullets as much as we would like, because they all have side effects. They affect other processes in the body besides the disease they're trying to treat. But even so, vitamins are never going to be magic bullets. Let's take colon cancer for an example. I heard a wonderful talk about 10 or 15 years ago now. One of the world's experts in colon cancer was presenting his research at the American Association for Cancer Research meetings, which I attended on a yearly basis. And one of the things he said was, my studies show unequivocally that if you have a if you have a lifestyle that includes a high fiber diet, a low fat diet, one that provides adequate calcium and adequate B vitamins, and the people who had adequate calcium and B vitamins were often supplementing, and includes exercise and weight control, that's going to dramatically reduce the risk of colon cancer. But I can't show that any single one of them is effective by itself. Now you think about what should the take-home message be, and you've seen some of these take-home messages. You've probably seen headlines that say, you know, there's really no evidence that a high-fiber diet can reduce the risk of colon cancer. And you see other headlines that say, don't worry about the fat content of your diet. That can't really be proven to decrease the risk of cancer. Or don't worry about getting adequate calcium or adequate B vitamins. There really isn't any convincing evidence. So if you take those things apart, and, you know, look at them one at a time, there's absolutely, you know, you can't prove that they play a role, that they actually are beneficial. But is that the take-home message we should be? Just ignore all of that stuff? Don't pay attention to any of it? When we know that a holistic approach, which includes all of those things, can give you a dramatic decrease in the risk of colon cancer. To me, that's what the take-home message should be. And that's why, you know, all these studies where they're just looking at individual supplements and not looking at a holistic approach, those are severe limitations. They're not really telling us what we'd like to be studying. So the question is, why doesn't somebody do a study to determine whether a holistic approach to supplementation is beneficial? Well, the answer is somebody has. The landmark study was the very first study to look at the benefits of multiple supplement use, the very first one. Now, the other thing is, if you look, you know, you're looking at diseases here, and most scientific studies are very short term. You know, if you're doing an interventional trial where you're giving somebody maybe a vitamin versus a placebo or a drug versus a placebo, if you do a 6-month study, that's a pretty long study. You're going to spend a lot of money doing that kind of study. You know, if it goes on to a year or 2 years or 3 years, those are considered extremely long-term studies. There are very few of those that are done, but diseases take 10 to 30 years to develop. So how do you actually look at whether you can impact the risk of disease?